G'day and welcome back to the channel, and it is National Drone Safety Awareness Week in the USA, being heralded by the FAA as their attempt to communicate with people who fly drones and model aircraft and keep everybody safe. Laudable intent indeed. And part of this whole program was this live stream with the Drone Week event with students, and this was streamed less than a day ago here, 21 hours ago, as I make this video. And this was basically a panel of students and the FAA Administrator Steve Dickson. It was introduced by, let me just start this playing, get to the right part where the lovely lady appears, Kristen somebody. Oops, oh no, I hate YouTube. Here we go. Right, so let's just turn on the noise.
Awareness Week. This week will showcase the ways we are safely integrating drones, from learning how to fly to having fun, to turning your passion into a profession, to using drones for good. And what better way to kick off Drone Week than with our administrator and students? Today, we're joined by students from the Global Air Drone Academy, their co-founder, Aino Umo, and the FAA Administrator Steve Dickson. Steve just spent the last few days in Florida with NASA and SpaceX, and we know he's excited to tell you more about all of the adventures with last night's launch. After the students present their innovative drone projects, we'll open it up for a Q&A. So if you're with us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, you can also join us for the Q&A by asking.
Now, that's interesting, isn't it? She's saying that this is going to be opened up for a Q&A. Let's just listen a bit more.
Asking your questions in the live stream post. Now,
so she's saying you can post your questions in the live stream post, and this will be open for discussion. That's fantastic. What a great thing. It's creating a dialogue with the drone community. The people watching this video will be able to engage with Steve Dickson from the FAA and any of these kids as well. That's a fantastic way of looking at things. And here we go. We've got kids now. There's a good representation of African American children here, and there's one white kid down here. I don't see any white middle-aged males, but that happens once Steve comes along. Let's go to about the 3-minute mark, and I think we'll find, here he is, Steve Dickson himself. There he is, the man from the FAA. Now, Kristen did mention he'd been to Florida. He'd been to Florida to watch some rockets launch, and unfortunately, Steve is a bureaucrat. Steve is used to not being challenged. He's used to basically talking at people, and I don't say talking to people, I say talking at people, and that's very much obvious because about this point here, Steve starts to talk about his Florida experience. Now, he's just had a break in Florida watching rockets. Now, remember, this is Drone Week, but Steve goes on for quite some time talking about rockets in Florida. Let's listen a bit.
I'm here to learn and here to find out about the great things that you all are doing. You know, one of my highest priorities as FAA Administrator, I have 45,000 employees, and we're in a whole host of
now, it's worth noting the kids here, this is not really much interest to them. You know, they don't want to hear about this guy's life story. They're here to talk about drones. They want to listen about drones. So, but Steve's introducing himself. Let's move on a little bit further and see what Steve's got to say. So now we're up to the 10-minute mark. Let's listen to Steve.
Space station for about 6 months. So it's the first true operational mission for the SpaceX crew.
So he's talking about SpaceX, space. This is not the space stream. This is the drone stream. They want to know about drones, not about space station. But maybe he was just having a quick chat about that. Let's move forward a little bit further and see what he has to say here.
Out of Kennedy Space Center. I didn't think we'd be able to see the recovery.
Now we're at 10 minutes and he's talking about, well, 15 minutes and he's still talking about space. And I think if we look at the comments over here, yeah, look, Mr. Dickson, stop wasting everyone's time. We want to know about drones, not SpaceX. And it's like people have recognized that this guy's, the guy he's talking to is NASA because he's crazy. He's not addressing the core subject here, which is drones. These kids have come to hear about drones, not about Mr. Dickson's holiday in Florida. This is not a school essay, what I did on my summer vacation. No, this is Mr. Dickson has completely missed the mark here, but maybe it gets better at the 17-minute mark.
Maybe somebody on the call today or at the Academy will be the 6th. You know, we'll see. But Robert went to Woodlawn High He then went off to the U.S. Naval Academy. Now, I'm an Air Force Academy graduate, so we have a...
No, he's just still rambling on about himself and bits and pieces. There's no mention of drones yet. And look, the kid's Chandler here, he's nodded off. He's completely gone. Nairi's disappeared. Even poor Caden here is verging on the edge of sleep, I think. It's like this guy has just bored the snot out of these kids for 18 minutes, but surely he can't go on for too much longer. Let's go up here. Let's see what's happening.
And that will allow drones to benefit.
He's finally talking about drones, but I mean, he's lost the kids. Look, they're not interested. It's too long. I don't know how these kids are, maybe 10, 11, something like that. Their attention span is already fairly shallow, but it's short. But if you're going to be talking about stuff that's completely of no interest to them, they're going to go to sleep. Seriously, this guy has no acumen when it comes to this kind of thing. And as I say, he's talking at them. He's talking at them. He can see them on his screen. And if you see people falling asleep and glazing over, you realize that you're not telling them the right stuff. You need to change your pitch. You need to get more engaged with them. Doesn't matter if you're a bureaucrat. You don't have to be engaged. You just have to tick the boxes, and his boxes were speak for 25 minutes, which he's obviously doing. But this is terrible, and this speaks to the arrogance of bureaucrats. They will do what they want to do, and to hell with anything else. And that's basically what's happening here. Now look over the side. Stop wasting our time. We can look up your resume if we want to hear about drones. And this is it. Even the people watching the stream realize this guy is just boring these kids to death. And then when he finally mentioned drones, someone says, "Hey, he said drones, guys. We are saved." Oh, no. But then we've got stuff here like, FAA should not ban flights of hobby vehicles under 400 feet over 250 grams. FAA should not criminalise hobbyists. There's a lot of criticism coming out of here about the FAA, and especially the remote ID, as you'll see further on. Drone week going to take a week. So it's not a good start. It's not a good start. But then the kids here go through and they relate what they're doing. They were challenged with coming up with business ideas using drones. And so they do. They go through, and it's some interesting stuff. But Steve Dickson praises them all and says, what a great idea. Watch this whole video. I would suggest you go and watch the stream if you didn't watch it live. But he says, yeah, this is a great idea. This is fantastic. But what he fails to tell them is that most of these kids couldn't fly a drone commercially because you need a Part 107. And I don't think they're old enough to qualify for a Part 107 certification. So while saying you're doing a wonderful thing, this is great, he's not saying, but you can't do this. You can't legally fly a drone for commercial purposes, for the furtherance of a business. You're too young. It's kind of deceptive, isn't it? He's not very good. Anyway, let's jump forward because we've got Caden down here, and he is the kid that really sort of speaks for all these people in the comments here. Maybe he was reading the comments. If he was, good on you, Caden. I want to play you what he says, and I want to get Steve Dickson's reply because this is great. Okay, so here's Caden. Listen to what he says and listen to the questions he asks.
Yeah, so I think drones are a great experience for kids, and I'm actually trying to get more kids into it because I think it's a good way for kids to learn engineering.
Yep, he's dead right. Engineering. This is the heart of the STEM and STEAM programs, which often, to date, have used drones as a core part of their teaching. And let's listen to what Steve has to say about that, about the whole idea of kids building their own drones.
Absolutely.
And the soldering and stuff like that's going to help them learn how motors can turn and how stuff programs, because it does take a lot of coding. So
absolutely. I agree. I couldn't agree with you more. Back when right nowadays, it's harder to find things to work on because things are so automatic. Like when I was a kid, my dad taught me how to work on the car.
Yeah, that's right. It's a rite of passage. And I bet you there are a lot of parents now teaching their kids how to work on drones. But what Steve is not telling the audience and the kids is that when the remote ID bill comes in, they won't be allowed to work on their own drones. They won't be allowed to build their own drones. Even something as simple as changing a motor will be forbidden because it won't be a certified craft anymore. The craft will have to be purchased from certified manufacturers and be certified craft, and you will not be allowed to modify them or even maintain them yourself under the proposed rule. So what Steve is saying, this is great, but he's not telling them, but you won't be able to.
But now so many things are electronic that it's hard to do that unless you're working on an old car. So, this is the same kind of opportunity in a different way, I think.
It's not, you're taking this opportunity from these children, FAA. So, Steve, you're being incredibly disingenuous and ignoring the elephant in the room, which is the NPRM for Remote ID, which forbids you to build your own drones or to modify your own drones, except if you're flying in a FRIA.
So I've got a question about the remote ID. So with the racing drones, we stay under like 100 feet.
Now hear that just very carefully. Caden has said, with racing drones, we stay under 100 feet. Now he's very carefully qualified the area in which he flies, under 100 feet with his racing drones.
Is there any way that like they could separate remote ID for drone racing, because they're already so compact that it'd be hard to fit that in there?
Right.
So it would kind of like, I feel like some people might like be unwilling to put it in.
Yeah, so the remote ID rule includes areas that are outside that are.
He's talking about FRIAs. Steve is talking about FRIAs. He's very disingenuous when he talks about FRIAs. Listen to what he says.
Like for model airplanes or recreational drones. So it could be like maybe like a football field at a school or a park or something.
No, it couldn't be, Steve, because FRIAs must be operated by a community-based organisation. And they are not going to be football fields. They're not going to be schoolyards. They're going to be grassy fields in the middle of nowhere, because the goal is to keep this unremote ID'd craft well away from built-up areas. So, and there are only going to be a certain number of these FRIAs issued, and after a couple of years, there'll be no more. So they will be few in number and few in distribution. There won't be many of them. They won't be in the middle of built-up areas. They won't be in parks. They won't be in schools. So you have just deceived these children.
Like that, and we have actually will recognize those for recreational drone activities. So what you're talking about, if it's actually inside a building.
No, it's not inside a building, Steve. He very clearly stated it was below 100 feet.
Or inside a confined space.
What's a confined space, Steve? Is that a school park which is surrounded by, or a park or a sports ground surrounded by trees, so it's confined? Or does it have to have a roof? You haven't really elaborated. You haven't made this very clear.
Those kinds of altitudes.
Hold on. Let's just go back a bit. I want to hear what he had to say there. Let's just listen to that without interruption.
Or inside a confined space at those kinds of altitudes.
At those kind of altitudes. Now, Caden very clearly stated those kind of altitudes are under 100 feet. So Steve is just saying at those kind of altitudes, and what else does he have to say?
That will still not require, even after those kinds of limited activities won't require remote identification.
Right, so Caden's made a very clear case. Drone racing, below 100 feet. Steve Dickson has just said those kind of activities will not require remote ID. Fantastic, Steve. You have just exempted drone racing from the requirements for remote ID. Now, why did Steve say this? Is Steve letting something slip? Because remember, the final rule hasn't been released yet. It's not going to come out until sometime probably after Christmas. So is the final rule going to include an exemption for drone racing, for craft flying below 100 feet? Is he just letting the cat out of the bag? Or is he perhaps lying? Or is he perhaps completely ignorant and has no clue about what he's talking about? I cannot say that. Only time will give us the answer to that. But let's listen further to what Steve says about remote ID and altitude.
What we're talking about is really for broader scale applications, business applications, or things that are at higher altitude, more than 300 or 400 feet.
So remote ID is only going to apply to business applications or aircraft or models that fly above 300 or 400 feet. Brilliant. He's given us another get out of jail free card. Is this again a further insight into the final rule? Is it only going to be required above a certain altitude? If you want to fly above a certain altitude, you need remote ID. Could that minimum altitude be 300 feet or 400 feet? Is the hobby going to be exempted because it's supposed to fly below 400? Maybe this is a glimmer of hope. Or maybe Steve Dickson is just full of bullshit, or maybe he just doesn't know and he's making stuff up on the spot. But remember, this is Drone Safety Awareness Week, and this is the administrator of the FAA. I do not believe he would lie. Surely he cannot tell bald-faced lies to a panel of children and a much wider viewing audience on YouTube. He would not misrepresent the situation, surely. So this kind of points to the fact that in the final rule, you will not need remote ID if you're flying below 300 feet and not flying for business purposes. That's got to be good news, doesn't it?
You know, at a distance, maybe still within visual line of sight, but not in the kind of environment that you're talking about. That's
so. Again, Caden very carefully defined his environment, drone racing below 100 feet. And again, for the third time, Steve Dickson has said, you will not need remote ID in that kind of environment. Fan-damn-tastic. That is brilliant. So the hobby now needs to make a copy of this video. Everybody who plans on flying drones or model aircraft needs to take a copy of this video, just in case the FAA remove it. And that is your get out of jail free card. If the final rule doesn't exempt models and drones flying below 300 feet, then you want to keep this video, because if you continue to do so, which I recommend that you do, fly without remote ID, if you are hauled up for a judge, say, look, I was simply acting on the word of the administrator of the FAA during Drone Safety Awareness Week. Is he lying? And if he's lying, then is the FAA really qualified to remove the freedoms of people if they are untrustworthy, if they deceive people in this way? They're not qualified to be entrusted with those freedoms. So I would argue that all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary, because Steve Dickson has now 3 times told us that drone racing will not require remote ID, and that flying, he's told us once that flying under 300 feet won't require remote ID, twice that flying under 100 feet won't require remote ID. I think that's pretty definitive from the top man at the FAA. So, hey, as I say, take a copy of this video. You may need it in court, or Steve may have just let the cat out of the bag in terms of the shape of the final rule when it's released either later this year or early next year.
more of a closed circuit type of activity.
So there we go. That sort of summarizes it all. It's kind of good, isn't it, that we had this stream. But remember that Kristen promised us a question and answer thing where you could post your questions to Twitter or Facebook or YouTube and have them answered by Steve and maybe the kids. So let's zoom along to the end here. Excuse the pun. When we get along to the end, there was no question and answer. There was no engagement with the wider community. Why was that? Well, I think you'll find that it's because if you read these comments here, they are all totally critical of the FAA and Steve's performance here. And look, for example, Steve Dickson, please resign. Your policies undermine STEM and hobby access to RC aviation. So, yeah, Steve, stop interrupting. Learn how to be an active listener. They're very, very critical. I think whoever was running the stream realized that if they opened the floor to wider questions, it would be a disaster, a total disaster. The FAA are not prepared to accept criticism. Remember, their strategy whenever they do something wrong is just ignore the criticism and try and cover stuff up. When they stole my video and used it without permission in one of their videos, they didn't acknowledge, they didn't apologize, they just covered it up. They deleted that video and re-edited it with new footage. There was no question and answer. There was no question and answer system offer. They offered it at the beginning and then they didn't offer it at the end. They withdrew it because they didn't want to face up to the huge amount of criticism that they experienced during this whole stream because Steve just really doesn't have a clue. But there you go. I certainly hope that this is a window to the final rule and that we will have the exemptions that Steve has promised us and that he's not just telling lies or making stuff up. And we'll see. We'll see. So I'd like you to go to the comments now and have your say. How do you rate Steve Dickson's performance in this whole stream? Are you perhaps inspired by the fact that maybe he let a few things slip that he shouldn't have? Or do you think he's just bullshitting us? Tell me what you think. And either way, I think based on what he said, I don't think you'll need to get remote ID if you want to fly below 300 feet. I mean, after all, the administrator of the FAA would not lie, would he? There you go. Now, I'm going to continue trying to keep everyone honest here. It's a full-time job keeping regulators honest because they are so good at being dishonest. And for that, I thank my Patreon supporters. You give me the freedom to keep an eye on all the stuff that's going on around the world, all different countries, and to try and help the community fight the battle against unreasonable removal of freedoms that we've enjoyed for so many years without any kind of injuries or damage or risk to other people. So we shouldn't give those up without a fight. And I'm here to lead the fight. No one else has got the time or the inclination by the look of it. I'm going to lead that fight for as long as I can. So thank you to my Patreon supporters. You make it possible for me to do that. And in the meantime, thanks for watching. I've got plenty more stuff to get on with. So I'll spot you later. Bye for now.